They said, we've got no money, but everyone's so friendly. The sound of your own feet as you walk on stage. So with that level of disdain for the low-grade celebrity hosting this afternoon, it augurs well for this session on reinventing the celebrity biopic, or as these three directors call the session, being forced to use celebrities in order to get a commission.
Guilty. Yeah.
Come on in. It's been absolute rubbish up until now. Basically, I'll fill you in what's happened. I walked out to the sound of my own feet, okay? Walked in here. They kind of give me an ironic welcome again. I then said that these guys were here just basically using people like me in order to get commissions. You're up to date. Though, if this session was actually commissioned by the BBC, of course, we would have to change the name to Celebrities, Biopics, and Me. It's always on me at the BBC. So, can we reinvent this genre? My guests this evening. We have three directors to talk about three very different types of films this afternoon. We have Leo Burley, series director. Don't go too early. Don't go too early on him. Leo Burley, series director whose film My Dad, the Peace Deal Me won a Grierson in 2018. He's in production with his latest series, My Grandparents' War and Me. No, just My Grandparents' War. Leo Burley. Give Leo a welcome. Ursula Macfarlane is an award-winning documentary and drama director whose latest film, Untouchable, premiered earlier this year at Sundance, the kind of the second tier to the Sheffield documentary festival.
Very low rent.
Let's hear it for Ursula. And Rob Coldstream, a director, exec producer, and former Channel 4 commissioning editor who no doubt has turned down many people's ideas in this room. So if I introduce him and if anybody's, been turned down by Rob, feel free just to give him nothing when we introduce him here. He's here to talk about his new project, Jade. Let's hear it for Rob. So, who should we start with? Leo, why is this genre still so popular?
I'm not sure it is a genre to start off with. I don't know whether you can lump all these films together and say that they're all similar. I think, since time immemorial, we've liked to look at the antics and the stories of famous people. It's how we judge ourselves. We use people in the public eye to navigate our own lives. We judge ourselves by them. That's why Shakespeare wrote Hamlet. That's why he wrote about kings and queens and soldiers who have heightened importance, because we're interested in looking at people in the public eye. We find that fascinating. I think we always will.
So, Ursula, if it's been there for a very long time, is it actually possible to reinvent the biopic? I mean, surely it...
I hope so.
Surely, I mean, this is going to make it a very short session, but is it kind of not what it is?
I think you're right. If you look at the bestseller lists for books every Christmas, they're 99% biography, and I think it's because, there are people out there who seem better than us, or braver than us, or more talented than us, or just human beings, and we want to kind of understand their vulnerabilities and their frailties. And I think you're right, we go there, we read about these people to sort of admire them, but also learn about ourselves. But often without much context, and I think maybe the films that we're making are trying to put those people's lives in the context of their time, particular moments in history. That's what I think your film's doing, my film, and your film too, as we will discover. So I think it is possible, but you're maybe looking at those people for different reasons, just than a straightforward... Let's learn all about the life of, Harvey Weinstein, for example. So we're trying to find out something. They're like a lightning rod, I think, a conduit through which we can explore other things.
So is the biopic then, Rob, is it pretty much the go-to. Is it the Andy McNabb airport book of filmmaking? Does it feel like it's the easiest access point to get someone to watch?
Well, these guys have said, right, we're just endlessly curious, endlessly nosy, and we love heroes, and we need villains, and, you know, mountains of books have been written about this, right? It goes back to people in caves telling stories about their monsters and heroes and so on. So, yeah, I mean, I think you can not necessarily reinvent it every year, but you can keep moving it forward by, you know, in gradual steps and innovations. And, you know, we've seen, at the moment, we've got, Margaret Thatcher on BBC Two. You know, who would have thought you could have, you know, more Thatcher? But they're showing it, you know, you can kind of, there is room for more Thatcher if you.
That's the soundbite, right? We're just going to use. There's room for more Thatcher. You heard it in Sheffield. You know. Good luck getting home. So, but there is a lot. I mean, you say Margaret Thatcher. There's Whitney Houston, the Queen, Ted Bundy.
Two Houstons in 2 years, right? The same character, same material, two different authors, right?
There we go.
Kevin MacDonald.
There they all are. Rupert Murdoch, just under Thatcher, which nothing's changed there then.
And totally different films, though. Totally different films about the same person. So it's about authorship, I guess.
So we got all of this. We've also got, you know, Entertainment E has been doing this for, you know, in the States. They've got 17 series, 500 hours of television. There they are. We've got everyone from Steven Seagal, Kate and Pippa Middleton, the Chippendales, Hulk Hogan, Halle Berry, Cheech and Chong, which is also how Michael Gove asks for it from his dealer. You're a big Steven Seagal fan, Leo.
I've seen all of these, yeah. The Chippendales is excellent.
But there is a point here, because if you actually look at everything that we put up on screen first, that to me seems that's a classy product. Now, this is still telling stories about people's lives, but it seems, is there a difference in all of this?
I'm not going to criticize E. Sorry, that was ironic. I mean, I think it's... Look,
yeah, what's
people buy magazines.
Well, no, I actually don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm asking you guys.
I could take the Hulk Hogan documentaries, you know, on, you know, I'm not sure about Hulk Hogan, but yeah, I mean, if you know, there's an audience for Hulk Hogan films, then I think there's probably an unlimited number of Hulk Hogan films that could be made, you know, and if people enjoy them, why not, right? But there's obviously a huge difference between something that is simply painting a profile of here's the best bits and sort of someone's career, and you know, you can go from that to something that's just trying to do something maybe a bit more layered or context or kind of nuanced.
Because I think both of your films are very, very different. One about Jade Goody, one about Harvey Weinstein, but in a way there's a similarity where they are jumping off points to discuss the state of society at a current moment, which we'll come to. But I want to talk first of all about what you're working on at the moment, Leo, because we did a documentary together, and I thought, having done that, we were friends, and you have basically told me nothing about the next series that you've moved on to, and so the only reason why I've agreed to come here today is to find out. So you're using celebrity in a different way, almost as a journey film. Is that the right thing to say?
Well, I can't say too much about it because we've only just finished filming the first two. We haven't edited them yet. But the first two stars that we've worked with are Mark Rylance and Kristen Scott Thomas. And the film the series is essentially a way of approaching the Second World War, a very particular period of history, 1939 to 45, how it impacted upon them and their families, and indeed how it still impacts upon our lives today. So that's very much the ambition for the series. But it's not cut yet, and I can't reveal the names of the other two stars who are equally well known. But we're still making
But I can right now, and they are. But in terms of getting back to reinventing how these films are made, that to me seems very much in the style of Who Do You Think You Are, where you are bringing someone on a journey, you're giving them the information as they go on, rather than them maybe telling their story. Would that be right?
I think, funnily enough, all four stars didn't want to make a biopic. They were very clear about that they were interested in exploring their family history. But I suppose the difference to other family history series, or certainly our ambition, is that we've tried to give them more authorship. This isn't going back generations into 17th century weavers or anything. Very specifically about their grandparents' generation. And it's stories that they know. So they brought their own authorship to this to a certain extent. And that's the balance that we've been trying to find, to take them on a journey which they also have some authorship in. And that's very much where the series is at the moment.
And you feel that's pushing it a little bit further than where it currently is?
I think we're not completely reinventing the wheel, but we are trying to change it substantially, and we'll know more about that when I've come out of the edit in 8 weeks' time, so I'll let you know how that went.
Okay. Are we allowed to show a little clip?
Yes, please.
Okay, here we go.
Oh, so lovely.
Sorry, I should have set that up a bit. That's a clip from The Rushes. As I say, we haven't edited the film yet. Mark Rylance is an extraordinary man, and I can say that with some authority, having spent a lot of time with him recently. He brings his own take on the Second World War, and that's what I meant about authorship. His grandfather, in fact, both his grandfathers were prisoners of war in the Far East, and he explores their stories, but he brings to it a very clear political stance. Mark Rylance is a lifelong pacifist and anti-nuclear campaigner, and he was insistent that his views were taken into account. Mm-hmm. He very much wanted to make a balanced film which explored the Japanese point of view, and that's what we set out to do with him. But that came as much from him as from me, and that was the journey that we went on together. In this clip, he's just learnt that his grandfather was shot in the stomach and left to die in a particular location in Hong Kong, and he was very upset. He didn't know that had happened at that location.
So in that style of film, then, is it about trying to find out more about the well-known face, or is it about trying to find out more about the grandparent? What's the balance in all of that?
He was quite clear that he didn't want to make a biopic. He didn't want to talk about his own career, and indeed he doesn't. What you learn about them has to come organically from the journey, and they reveal bits about themselves as they go. I mean, that's not new. That's certainly not reinventing the wheel. But in this instance, he was driving some of the scenes. He was telling me who he wanted to meet and why he wanted to meet them. And that's unusual. That isn't what you'd normally do in a journey in which you lay out surprises for them and have revelations. And so it was a mixture. It was really balancing his political views and where he felt the story was going, which wasn't always where I felt the story was going, into one film.
Ursula, a different story, which maybe I'm not sure whether you were sure where it was going, was the film that you've just made.
Yeah, I mean, normally most films start with some level of access, and we had none at all to anybody actually at the beginning. But
you got it commissioned.
Yeah, so Simon Young and Tom McDonald.
Simon Young commissioned it.
He did.
I mean, Simon commissioned me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite easy to get a commission off Simon.
Really great. He's really great. No, he's really great.
So hang on.
He really is.
So you managed to commission this, and okay, so the BBC paid for this without you getting the access.
Yes.
So that's possible. Simon Young, he's just up there.
I've just
give him a
dropped
shout.
a bombshell.
That's how you do it. Wow.
No access whatsoever.
But that's not normal, is it?
No, but the producer was Simon Chin, who's got a bit of a reputation.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact beginning. I know Simon talked to me about it not long after the scandal broke. But I think, everybody felt this is a really important moment in our culture, in our history, in the history of men and women and power and the vulnerable, that we had to make this film, and we sure as damn it would get some people to talk. But obviously, Harvey would not be one of those people. So we knew that, I mean, obviously we tried to get Harvey to talk.
But you were never going to get him, because obviously there's legal cases going on.
We were never going to get Harvey.
It was not going to happen.
Yeah. So it's like a biography with a big gaping hole in the middle of it, which is the subject of the film. And I think that's what makes it really quite different. I mean, obviously, Jade is no longer here, but, you know, it doesn't, you know, he will not have wanted this film to be made. So that was the kind of starting point. And then, again, raised more money to be able to make the film, really with very little. And our producer, Poppy Dixon, who, is she here as well? I don't know. No, I think she's gone. You know, she literally researched, rang hundreds and hundreds of people, and it was extremely difficult to get people to talk. So it was kind of, you know, by stealth, by hook or by crook, you know, finally we got enough people to talk, and courageous people. We always knew that we would have some of the accusers, because they had, you know, they were very invested in it, and many women already had spoken, of course, and we knew there were others, and we wanted voices in there who hadn't already spoken. So we knew we'd get some women, and there are many women that you all know about who didn't want to take part, perhaps felt they'd already spoken. But it was a very difficult, long, drawn-out process of trying to get the others to talk, particularly ex-employees, people who knew him from way back when. And, you know, and I'm really proud of what we managed to do sort of against the odds, because it was really difficult.
Okay, we're going to have a little clip of this. Do you want to set this up for us?
I will just set this up, because in a way it's a bit counterintuitive. So this one is... We tried to make this a portrait of power. It's a sort of Greek tragedy about a man who rises to great heights and has the fatal flaw, and then it's his downfall. And this particular clip, our two young journalists go to a kind of launch party for something that Harvey is holding, and
this is
get into a row with him. And it's quite funny, but also it shows you the chilling extent of Harvey's power.
So the balance in this film of trying to tell the story of how Harvey Weinstein became that monster, trying to give a reflection of how the industry actually was complicit in it, and then trying to make a statement in terms of how we need to move on. There's a lot of balls that you're trying to juggle there with something which is still in court.
Yeah, indeed, and the story is not over. And we had to think about, you know, we had the Sundance sort of deadline looming, and we didn't and couldn't cover the ongoing investigation, but we had to kind of decide where we're going to end this story. And so we ended it quite deliberately in a sort of open way to suggest that this is not over. Because even if Harvey goes to jail, which personally I think is very unlikely.
You think it's unlikely?
Extremely, yes. And I say that with great sorrow in my heart, although obviously I'm totally neutral. But because the lawyer told me to say that. But you know, it's so hard to prove sexual assault and rape. And he has very powerful, expensive lawyers, and he has been dismantling their cases over the last few months, destroying their credibility. So
I'm mesmerized by that. I mean, for me, I felt this was just the next building block of Bill Cosby, who tried to get out of something. Everybody knew the story. Justice would be served. After you making this film, for you to say that you don't think...
Well, I have my doubts.
Common.
I have
Wow.
my doubts. You know, people rarely get convicted for rape. And more than that, he's an extremely powerful, still very wealthy man. But let's hope, you know, let's be positive about it, because there is a chance at the moment they're trying to bring about the Bill Cosby, I think it's called the Molyneux, that more plaintiffs will come in anonymously, and they'll build a case with other women outside the two women who've already brought, you know, the plaintiffs in the current case, which is 5 charges. They'll bring more women in, and then the kind of balance, the weight of evidence will change things. That's sort of what's being discussed at the moment. And then, I think I think things might look quite different. But your question about sort of keeping those balls in the air.
Keeping all of that in the air.
Yeah, and I think it's
because especially when we're talking about reinventing, the celebrity biopic, that idea of which one do you put more emphasis on? Because the early part of the film, for me, I was fascinated by how he became who he became in the first place. And in a weird way, because I knew more about the rest of the story, I almost wanted to hear more of that. So it's a balance, isn't it?
Yeah. No, we thought a lot about that because it is fascinating. I mean, it's quite fascinating. I think, you would never make a film about Harvey Weinstein if he hadn't done these things because...
Would you make a film about Harvey Weinstein if he wasn't Harvey Weinstein?
You mean a guy abusing women like that?
Yeah.
Well, it's a good
because
question.
This is the crux of this. This is the crux
of it,
of how we use celebrity.
Yeah.
And in a way, celebrity, when we see where celebrity started to go, late 90s, 2000s, and come on to Rob's film, there's almost a vacuousness that surrounds the word celebrity now. But yet, there's powerful stuff being made that without Harvey Weinstein being the well-known figure, that issue would not be out there.
No, because it's about power. Really, this story is about
There's
power.
lots of powerful men that aren't well known.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you could make a film about Matt Lauer and, all the other people and Kevin Spacey, maybe somebody already is making that film. Harvey was the kind of sort of cartoon figure of the Hollywood mogul, if you like. But I think only film nerds would really be interested in making a film about Harvey or watching a film about Harvey without all this stuff. So, I think it's that lightning rod thing that he becomes a sort of symbol of all these other powerful, usually men, who have been using their power to manipulate and abuse usually younger, vulnerable people, men and women, in Harvey's case.
I mean, to be fair, there are plenty of people in this room who've made documentaries about sexual predators or paedophiles who aren't famous. I mean,
I'm not saying they don't get made, Leo. Yeah. I'm saying that, in terms of profile, in terms of, the impact that film is going to make, it is being platformed on the celebrity of Harvey Weinstein, which I'm for a second, I'm not saying is a bad thing, but...
Well, what fascinates us about Weinstein is that he was so powerful. He had everything, He was, and I think Ursula's film is brilliant from the beginning because I didn't know all that stuff about Buffalo. I didn't know where it came from, so it really helped to learn about his trajectory. That he was a force of nature, and I think that comes across really strongly in the film. There's something about his appetites, isn't there? That he was voracious. He was what's the word you use?
Gluttonous.
Gluttonous. Yeah, he was gluttonous.
And his approach to life was, but we are fascinated by that. We're going back to what we said at the beginning. These people are archetypes for us. This is someone we're meant to look up to. He had everything. He had all the power.
I mean, it's Shakespearean in that sense. And I know what you're saying, that celebrity brings people in. And a lot of people sort of, in a way, criticised the initial accusers, the Gwyneth Paltrow's, they're just famous actresses, that's why everyone's interested. But, what I'd say to that is, well, that's great that people are interested because now we're talking about it. And also, they were young actresses. They were just
Well, I mean, a lot of this is
people.
fascinating because it's a grey area. For me, you're talking about Harvey Weinstein. That's what fascinated you. What fascinated me about the whole thing was the set of circumstances that actually allowed the behaviour to take place. And I think there's a brilliant moments when some of the people that work for Miramax, you can see them on camera and they are ashamed. And I think, coming on to Rob's documentary about Jade, there is also a thing about the people that I felt that your film said way more about how television was made at the turn of the century in this country and what was acceptable, who was a victim, who was protected, and I think there's something that these films have something in common.
Yeah.
Very much.
Well, what drew you to the Jade story?
Well, it's funny. I mean, when people sort of said to me when I started this, what are you doing? I said, oh, doing this thing about Jade Goody. And they went, oh, okay. And I said, yeah, it's a series, 3-part series. And people's faces would sort of go, really? What? The one kind of very senior kind of executive kind of actually laughed at me. And it kind of, it really pissed me off, actually, because it sort of reminded me of the way Jade was sort of treated when she was alive, in that she was sort of treated and talked about, perceived by some people as a sort of preposterous figure who was kind of not, who's she? What right does she have to be famous? It's almost beneath her dignity to kind of take her seriously. But I suppose...
Was that on the basis that because she was seen as a vacuous celebrity, that her life story arc wasn't enough to justify a series? Is that what they were kind of getting at?
No, I think it speaks to a sort of an underlying kind of snobbery in the whole Jade. I mean, she's an incredibly divisive figure, right? I mean, there's two things about that. I mean, one is the life story is utterly incredible. It's an unbelievably strong story of not just a working class woman, but as we got into it, we found she comes from a long line of working class women who have been downtrodden, abused, physically, emotionally, mentally, or at best, ignored. And the thing that drew me to Jade was, Jade refused to be ignored, and I think that makes her quite remarkable in a way. And so she almost by force of personality, she kind of launched herself into this celebrity world where she's totally unequipped, really, other than her street instincts to kind of survive. And I think most people will remember the kind of way it unfolds, that is sort of spectacular and kind of quite horrific in some ways, and ultimately tragic, right? So the story has an epic sort of drama in it, but what makes it so fascinating to look back at it now with the benefit of hindsight, right, is so much has happened in such a short time, right? With the seismic changes in Britain.
I find this, watching your film, was just, whoa, that was the type of Friday night joke we were doing at the time. The fact that, the TV reviews, the type of, misogynistic imagery that was put on front of newspapers, that was kind of, hey, it's the end of the 90s, it's 2000, it's beer, it's lads, it's World Cup. It was almost Well,
Channel 4 have a show called It Was Alright in the 1970s, where you look back and they play Benny Hill clips and you go, wow, can't believe it, we're doing that. But I didn't think that our generation was part of that change. Exactly.
Where we have to look at it and go, fuck.
Exactly.
That was us.
And it's sort of recent history, it kind of feels like ancient history now, because things seem to be moving so quickly in all sorts of other ways as well, politics and technology. And Jade's stories are sort of prefigures a lot of these things in a really interesting way. So,
Are we show a little clip?
Yeah.
Okay, what are we looking at here?
So this is a very nice gentleman who took it upon himself to write about Jade when she first appeared in the public eye. I mean,
for me watching that, it was very, very easy to paint, Kevin O'Sullivan as the bogeyman, in the fact that. But I quite liked the fact that he looked back and he owned what he did. Whereas if you look at the people in television who, I was part of that entertainment genre at that time, the people who made that television, some of the most uncomfortable moments in your documentary for me are program makers actually saying, well, yeah, and then, and she was really good in the tapes, and, we all know that that's not how the production meeting went. We know that people were being used, and if you look at Love Island now and the suicides and how we take care of people, there's almost a thing that there's a level of celebrity that is disposable and can be used, and then there's a level of celebrity which is actually something a little bit more, and maybe television needs to treat in a nicer way.
Well, I mean, the rules were still being navigated at that time, right? And I think it's important that the series isn't, you can't set out to sort of point the finger at any one particular set of person, or it's not just the tabloids or the produced
No.
shows, right? They're all creative people with geniuses, some of them, right? And they did have protocols in place from the beginning in Big Brother, and I'm sure they all care deeply about the people in their house, right? But I think everyone was finding their way, right? And I think almost inherent in the kind of that form of that television is conflict. And in the beginning of Big Brother, it was sort of quite a playful, happy, sort of optimistic, sort of naive thing. But I think inevitably, as each year goes by, the demand for the conflict to intensify increases. And so there is possibly a sort of almost unstoppable sort of move towards, you know, more intense drama. And that obviously creates problems, right? But, I mean, the other thing about that clip, though, is, I mean, obviously it's kind of loaded down with kind of misogyny in a kind of deep way. But the other thing, it's about class for me, this series, in many ways. And with Jade, you know, he was a fat, thick chav. And I think there's sort of tension at that time in Britain, and it's sort of underpinning the film in a sense, in that, you know, in Blair's Britain, there was almost like they wanted to will people like Jade out of existence. You know, we're all middle class now. You know, as John Prescott famously, sardonically said, you know, sort of taking the piss out of Blair. Jade was hated by kind of the Middle England, the sort of Tunbridge Wells kind of mentality, and for being sort of rude and, you know, getting pissed. And she was hated by the sort of cultural elite because she wasn't learned. But she spoke to millions of people who were a bit like her, who were invisible. Right? She had a consistency beyond that. And, you know, the elevator pitch for this series was originally how Jade Goody led to Brexit, right? Which is possibly pushing it a bit far, but. But you can see in the film, I think, lots of signs of there's trouble brewing here. This isn't going to end well, and people like Jade do exist. And, you know, it's interesting that her sort of death coincides with the explosion of all sorts of other sort of forces that are erupting, right? So
yeah, because for me, what's interesting about the titles of your two films is that yours is called Jade, and in a way, a lot of it isn't about Jade.
Well, maybe we should call it Jade, a warning from history. You know,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
You know,
well, no,
I mean, but yeah, you know, that's a working title. So
yeah, okay,
you know.
okay. But in terms of, you know, front and center, Weinstein is not in your title.
It's not a very attractive name or person, is it really? I mean,
No.
I think it's really off-putting. We could have called it Weinstein, but we felt it was so much more than just a man, you know, and he doesn't have that. I mean, everyone knows who Jade is. Weinstein, not so much. Harvey Weinstein, sexual predator, abuser, allegedly, people know about. But we just felt that the word untouchable just, for us, summed up everything that he is, because he was for years, seems like he still is. He may well be in the future, we don't know. So we wanted to give it a kind of thematic, almost epic title that, you know, wasn't just about one man.
It's interesting for someone like me who's worked with you and made a certain type of film to look at. You were never going to get Harvey Weinstein. So there was never going to be any conflict between you and he, apart from when he sees the film.
I think he's probably already seen it.
Has he? I think, yeah.
He has a lot of spies.
Okay.
So
Mossad. Mossad.
Yeah. Mossad, he's got Mossad working for him, so ex-Mossad. Yeah.
And obviously, you know, Jade no longer with us, but when you're working with you know, someone like Mark or someone like me, how difficult is it to make your film?
It's funny you should mention that. Paddy and I met, and the first meeting didn't go well at all.
I thought it went very well.
He told me in no uncertain terms that he was thinking of making a very different film to the film that I was thinking of making, and he gave me quite short shrift. And in all seriousness, it was a really interesting meeting for me, because the film we ended up making was neither the film that he set out or the one that I set out. It was something that we authored together. And that was what was interesting about it. That's what made it, for me, it wasn't always an easy journey, but it was a real one. And I think one of the first things Paddy said to me was that for you it's just a documentary. For you it's a good story. For me, this is my family. My father was shot dead. I want you to think about that for a little minute. And that, that's the reality, that when people like Paddy entrust you with their stories, it's real for them. And you have to respect that. And I think that comes across in, the treatment you give Jade. It's about giving her the respect that she didn't get in life. And it's important.
I mean, from my point of view, just on that and moving on to Jade, is I was more than happy to tell my story. I wasn't prepared to volunteer my brothers or my mother or my wife whose stories it wasn't. So, and therefore, if that meant that you didn't have, and here's Paddy's family life. Well, I mean, I didn't care if you had my life. I wanted to make a story about how that agreement affected me and people in Northern Ireland. And I think if you're, with Jade's mother's obviously in the film, how much permission did you get, in terms of, or how does it work when someone's...
Well, we didn't have any access at the point of commission. And obviously, I mean, there's no way we could have made this without access to the family, right? Because we needed to tell it from the inside. I mean, we've seen the story from the pundits and from TV producers telling the story. We wanted to hear it from them. So, entirely down to the work of Claire Cameron, our amazing series producer, who's back there somewhere, who is just a complete force of nature. We spent month after month after month going back and back and back to the family, because Jade's close family and circle there's quite a sort of armour around them, because they've been turned over so many times, and they still have tabloids sniffing around them all the time, and it creates a lot of sort of tensions within the family. So with Claire's persistence, they gradually sort of understood and came to trust that we were trying to give her the respect. I mean, OJ, why shouldn't we give an ordinary extraordinary person like Jade the same sort of respect, and a sort of multi-part series that's sort of unfolding and exploring the character and the time. So fortunately we gradually won over the various sort of strands of this family and Jade's partners and friends and so on. And and I think maybe we should watch a clip, right? Is that where we're going? I don't know.
Yes, I'm a very slick host. Yes, this brings me on to, I believe, we have a clip. That is very, very powerful for me, because it paints a picture of abuse throughout that girl's life before she became in our living rooms. In terms of the victims that you were speaking to, it seemed to be people who it had happened to maybe once, twice.
Twice, yeah, sometimes.
How difficult was it to get those guys to tell their story? Because in a way, with someone like Jade and Jade's mother, whose life has been a litany of abuse, the moment you ask them, they say, well, look, you want to know, here it is. But it must have been, was it easier or harder?
Well, it was very, very difficult balancing act, because we wanted to try and include women who hadn't necessarily spoken before. And there's a woman in the film who was allegedly raped 40 years ago. And that's one of the earliest ones that we know about, which shows a kind of very early developing pattern. And we were very aware that we didn't want to go and talk to lots of women and then perhaps get them into the mindset of thinking that, because how difficult these early meetings are. You're trying to work out whether somebody's a good screen character, and whether they can tell their story expressively and eloquently. So we didn't want to go around and meet loads of people and then end up having to drop them. So we were very kind of strategic and careful about the people that we met. There are a lot of women who'd already spoken. We didn't necessarily want to speak to them again, although there's a couple who've already, who are not speaking for the first time. But a lot of the women in our film are speaking for the first time. And, it's what you always try and do, spend time with them, have long Skype calls with them, meet them if you can, gain their trust, make them feel comfortable, give them, as much time as they need for the interview, make sure they've got someone with them afterwards, just all the things that you would normally do in any filming situation where you were dealing with people who've been traumatized. And, that was, and I feel proud that we did do that. And we had not a completely female team, but we had a lot of women on the team. When I say a lot, there weren't loads of us, but, we had female sound recordists, female ACs, PAs, in different locations, and I think that really helped. But not completely, I thought it was important there were men around as well. We approached it with, I hope, with a lot of sensitivity, and then we showed all of the accusers, we showed them the film before it premiered at Sundance. That was very important that they had seen it before the general public saw it. And, and I think from the feedback that we've had is they're very proud and feel empowered to have spoken. Not that it's easy. It wasn't easy then, it's not easy now. I spoke to one this week and she said, 18 months has gone by and it doesn't make it any easier, but I'm just glad that people are speaking out.
Because it brings us on to that whole thing of trying to get good material. It's whether someone has something to lose. And it's very, very difficult to especially with the world of celebrity in terms of, gaining their trust, Leo, what they have to lose, what they don't, in terms of Jade's family, who had been screwed over so many times. Did you try to speak to any of the women who, how can I put this, maybe were consensual with Harvey and got a statue?
Got a statue? Well, I don't know
like the rumors around Harvey Weinstein are sexual predator.
Yeah.
Then there's another group of people that fooled around with Harvey and were rewarded.
Without a shadow of a doubt. Well, as far as I know from other journalists.
So in terms of people who have something to lose and people who have something that don't, those women that were on screen, you could see how much they felt that they had to lose by even trying to recall the moments from 30, 40 years ago when their life changed forever. But in terms of, you say the film was about power. And so there's some powerful people who are still a success that are still complicit in what he did.
Absolutely. There's loads of them out there. That's why it was so hard to get people to talk. They know who they are. As you said, those people who were courageous enough, and I do think they are so courageous, the people in our film, who talked about their own sense of complicity or survivor guilt almost, that they had a good, a lot of people who worked for Harvey Weinstein went on to have really good careers. It was a good move.
You could see a lot of the guilt.
Yeah.
You could see
And
there were
they
some
feel
people in
guilty.
Miramax that were just, they knew what they'd seen, they knew what they were happy to let go, and they knew the amount of money that they had received.
Money, power.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way a bit about Big Brother, I have to say.
Well, I was going to
It was a good train to be on, the Big Brother train, for the channel and, for many people. It was making careers and it was making a lot of money, so.
Did you find any of that whenever you were trying to get subjects to talk about Jade, that they maybe looked back on those times and thought, I'd really rather not?
I think we spoke to almost everyone we wanted to speak to. Not really. I don't what the question. I can't be sort of spokesman for Big Brother, right? I mean, Big Brother was it was an amazingly innovative.
I'm not asking you to, I'm not for a second asking you to.
And there was a lot of collateral damage that came out of it.
Yes, I'm not asking you for a second to defend it. I'm just saying that whenever you go back in and you delve into that world, You know, are there people that think, ooh,
Well, we spoke to
the house in Notting Hill's quite nice, but I'd rather not discuss that?
I don't know. I mean, we spoke to a lot of people who were in the house with Jade, who, you know, and it was interesting. And there's sort of poignancy to it, and certainly the poignancy to kind of the videotapes you see at the beginning of our film, of all these people, this whole generation of people that sent in these VHSs, hoping for this thing and not knowing where it was all going to lead, right? And I don't know. I mean, there was sort of winsome regrets from the people who went into the house who immediately just disappeared, right? You know, they had a Brill Cream sort of contract for $5,000, and then or they had a sort of, but generally speaking, they spoke incredibly warmly of Jade, you know, and I think slightly sort of felt, thank God, you know, I'm glad I disappeared, you know, because
okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're all complicit, though, aren't we?
Yeah.
I mean, I watched Big Brother and I enjoyed it. You know, what are we saying that?
Leo, I fucking hosted Love Island. I mean, come on here. I mean, this isn't the South Bank show.
I rest my case.
I mean, I think you'll find 20 minutes ago I said that the television that I was part of, that was that world.
Yeah, it really was. And I think, and I go back to the fact that what we talked about, we are fascinated by people on telly, we are fascinated by people in the public eye, and that goes for the contestants on the first Big Brother, which I watched every single minute of. I thought it was extraordinary television. I'd never seen anything like it. When they cut the feed, because they were so worried that they were arguing about Nasty Nick. I mean, it was just,
You cut to the clucking chickens, right?
We are all complicit in that.
That's what hindsight gives us, doesn't it? You know, if you make a film like this, you know, and when I'm talking about Weinstein, I'm not judging those people because I think, you know, I don't think everybody knew everything. I think maybe there was a small number of people who signed the checks and things, but I think probably the great majority of people perhaps suspected something, but had not seen and couldn't. So what I'm saying is I think it's very complicated, and I think when you make these films, you know, I'm not standing there in judgment of those people, but I want to just sort of poke it around and look at it and ask. One of the things I always wanted early on in this film is for the audience to look at it and think, if I was that marketing person in Miramax in 1998, what would I have done if that young woman came to me and said that her co-worker had been assaulted? What would I have done? And I think maybe that's the thing about biography, isn't it? You know, that we look at these people who do more exciting things, allegedly, than we do, but actually they're talking about, as you say, you know, we all do things that we're ashamed of, and hopefully something like Jade and maybe Weinstein, they're sort of cautionary, like they're modern fairy tales, or the dark side of a fairy tale. And that's why I think it's important that we're, you know, opening up that sort of box.
It's very
and having a look
complicated,
at it.
isn't it? It's very complicated. Exploitation, which I think our programs both have in common in a way, is, you know, and we're all complicit. And is it possible to exploit oneself? And if so, if I say it's okay to exploit me, is that actually okay? Should someone step in and say no? And the lines of responsibility are kind of complicated and shared, and it's a very interesting thing to sort of wrestle with.
But there was one contributor in your film, Zelda Perkins, who did stand up against Harvey.
She did, yes.
And she paid for it big time.
Yeah.
She lost her career.
Yeah.
She never worked in film really again after that, or certainly for at least a decade.
She suffered enormously.
She was absolutely isolated. So, you know, there's a price to pay for having principles and standing up to bullies. And you know, it doesn't always
Well, I mean, a lot of the women who spoke out 18 months ago have not worked. They have not worked. So, you know, are they seen as troublemakers?
Yeah.
Well, let's just look at that and sort of move on, sort of in a slightly different direction. Does in reinventing the biopic mean, you know, in a story like Weinstein, so many female voices on screen? There's very few female directors. If you look at, you know, Hollywood and the amount of lines and time that women have, is it something to reinvent the genre that we need to actually be putting more female filmmakers in telling
More
female stories?
Yes, I think so. I mean, you know, I don't think that only women can make films about women's subjects, or only men can make kind of muscular films about, you know, I really do think there are men around us making fantastically sensitive films, and and yes, I'm a woman, and Poppy, my producer, was a woman, and Sasha, we felt, like I said, it was quite important to have a sort of largely female team, mainly for the purposes of, interviewing those women who are very traumatized. But, our producers, Simon and Jonathan Chin, are men. I feel this is a sort of dialogue that we should all be having together. Our editor was a man. I wanted a male editor to get a different perspective. But yes, of course, there should be more female directors, and I think that's a whole big conversation that commissioning editors need to think about, that executive producers need to think about. But what's good is that if we're talking about biographies, a lot of the best biographies over the last few years have been about women. Whitney and Amy, and in a funny way, our Weinstein film is kind of about women as well. Not for the best reasons, but so I think we're really interested in women. We're interested in powerful women and the way that they're treated in society. So we just need to tell more of these stories.
If you're talking about the pulling the screen back on people's lives and that idea of biopic, you talk about Jade and Whitney and Amy. We have a moment in time now, Leo, where celebrities are now just volunteering their lives on Instagram. They're making their own films. How do you think that's going to change the genre of you actually being able to tell somebody something that the celebrity hasn't already told the world? Is it over?
It's all over now. This is it.
I'm always told it's over. Ever since I joined television, people have been telling me that TV's nearly done. And certainly it's true that my kids don't watch telly in the same way that I watch telly, and perhaps there is a problem in the way we interact with younger viewers, and we need to think about that.
But the revelations that celebrity are sharing themselves, does that hinder you as a storyteller trying to tell a story that's maybe already been offered up?
No, because I never set out to make a biopic anyway. I think Jade isn't a biopic. It's a social documentary. Its ambition is greater than that. It's very good, by the way. I've seen the whole first step, and I can't wait to see the rest of it. But it's about your ambition and your intention.
Yeah, the Twitter feed is just another great resource, right? Let's use that and put it in our next biopic, right? I mean, it needs some authorship. So, I mean, yeah, I think you can reinvent biography kind of just infinitely,
But also Instagram's a kind of fake reality as well. You
Exactly.
feel like
People
you're getting
want
close to people, but actually, not with everybody, but with most people, I think it's a sort of idealized version of their fabulous life that makes everyone else feel really jealous. And I don't think you're really getting to know those people, even if you've got pictures of their lovely wife and children. And I think our job as filmmakers is to go beyond that and put things in a context, which I think these three films do. It's something much bigger than just a single person. It's what that person's life tells us about ourselves and the world that they've been in.
Well, just to put it into context then, obviously, Jade, that's a long time ago. You had a lot of time to look back on that and tell the whole story. Something that interests me, Ursula, is his story isn't finished. So why make it now?
Well, that's a very good question. It's a really tricky one, actually, because we often thought to ourselves, well, if we did this in 10 years' time, like that wonderful OJ series, everybody might talk. Maybe his two ex-wives would talk. Maybe he might be in jail. Maybe he would be, things would be very different. But we felt like it was in the air, it was in the zeitgeist. I mean, I felt so strongly about Me Too and Time's Up and all these things that were happening that felt almost euphoric and yet dangerous. And it felt like, I just felt, for me personally as a filmmaker, I thought it was a real privilege to be able to say, right, we're going to grab this subject now and we're going to make this film and things are going to change. But it's going to be, maybe if people did look at it in 2 or 3 or 5 years' time, that it felt like a moment in our history. And perhaps we'll look back with poignancy thinking things didn't change. Or maybe they will have changed, who knows. But I think it was important to mark that moment without being current affairs. That was the other thing, to not make it a kind of current affairs film, but to elevate it from that and yet still make it feel like a moment in time, if you see what I mean.
Okay. All right, we're going to take a few questions. Before we do that, we have a challenge for you all. Is that? Is that what it is?
I think so. But
Yes. So this apparently is the celebrity biopic Jackpot Generator, which is a going from that very poignant moment there, Ursula, about how we want to change society. We're now going to go into whimsy. All you got to do is spin the wheel, get the name of celebrity and a channel, and give us your pitch for the next biopic. This has not been rehearsed. Who knows how good or shit this could be? Okay, let's see which ones get commissioned. First up, Ursula. Boris Johnson for E! Entertainment News. Your elevator pitch for this.
House of Toffs.
I'll take 6. Okay, that's quite good.
It's what the subtitle, House of Toffs, House of Cards. Yeah.
Yeah.
The bumbling blonde bombshell fool who fooled a nation. Does that work?
That works. The man who doesn't understand borders or Brexit. There we go. Let's see for Rob.
right. Okay.
There's a tracking shot in this, I think.
So you're Netflix.
Netflix. I'm Netflix.
Yeah. I've already actually Simon Young, your friend, he's heard about this idea I've got.
I mean, he's already gave you the money, and he hasn't even got the access.
Fatima is fighting him for it, but I've said to them both, I only want to work with Netflix. Right? Okay, so killer mortgages.
Okay.
For years, their iconic TV show fought for justice for first-time buyers everywhere. Right? But secretly, all along, they were amassing a fortune, gazumping their own clients. Right?
It's a dirty web that we will expose.
A dark web of rear extensions.
And on that bombshell.
At 7 hours.
You got there in the end. Right. I mean, that's a man who's been in a few pitches, I have to say. He just kept going there. Leo, I'm not sure what you've got.
Okay, this is, I want you to imagine Paddy as a cartoon character. Think
much.
South Park, but relocated to Derry. And at the end of every episode, you die a horrible death.
Much like my career.
Payback.
Like many of my gigs. Okay, we'll leave that there. Let's see, any questions from our audience? There's a couple of roving mics there. Stick your hand up. It's a vast arena, so without the mic, we won't hear you. Any? Yep. Over here.
Question for Rob. I wanted to ask about Channel 4's role in your film, because obviously when that series went out, it was broadcast on Channel 4, obviously, it did amazingly well. Your former employer as well. So I'm just interested, in light of what happened, with the ITV show and, 2 suicides, just the editorial line that you took about channel responsibility.
Well, you see the story and you tell it accurately and fairly. There weren't any suicides in our series, so, I mean, obviously, it's tragically something that's come into the spotlight recently, right? And, in Jade's time, what can I say, really? I think there were protocols in place right from the beginning of Big Brother, but they were working things out as they went along, and they learned from experience, and sometimes unexpected things happened that weren't handled as well as they should have been, clearly, and Channel 4 admitted that at the time and was censured for it, and it was the most complained about programme in television history, right? So the fact that I once worked at Channel 4 is totally irrelevant. In a way, it makes me keener to kind of go beyond, where one should to hold them to task as well. But you know, I mean, our particular film has a very keen focus, and it's about Jade Goody. Not, you know, we're not sort of necessarily rerunning the entire story of Big Brother or what happened in Big Brother House or even what happened in the Shilpa Shetty race row. And when you see the film, actually, there are a lot more interesting things that happened building up to that row that help you understand it, which I think in a sense are more interesting and revelatory than the fact of whether the broadcaster handled it correctly at the time. But hopefully we'll hold them to account, yeah.
Anybody else? Yep, the front here.
Hi, this is a question for Ursula. Hi. Just regarding one of the elements of your film that I thought was really interesting was Ronan Farrow. You had an interview with what appeared to be his source for the article that he wrote.
Yes.
I just wanted to know if you attempted at all to explore that source's story any further and what his testimony, what you managed to capture of his testimony that was on the cutting room floor.
Very little, actually, because very little was left on the cutting room floor because he didn't tell us very much. He only told us what he felt he could tell us. I mean, I can't really speak to his story because obviously we agreed to keep everything anonymous and confidential. He told us what we needed to know. He showed us the contract between the people who haven't seen it. Harvey Weinstein hired a group of intelligence, former Mossad officers, kind of crack Israeli spies to basically spy on people that he understood in the year up to the scandal being revealed, on people that he thought were plotting to write books or to do interviews with journalists, people like Ronan Farrow. And he set spies on Ronan Farrow as well. So we had an anonymous interview with a source in the film who knew what was going on, was able to show us the contracts between Black Cube, the ex-Mossad spy company, and Harvey Weinstein's lawyers, so we could see for ourselves what the contract was. But we agreed to keep everything else around that guy completely confidential, and he's a kind of whistleblower, so he has to be very careful. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Did you find him credible?
We checked him out.
You seem to be asking these questions in a way that you maybe
Are
know
you
something
him?
yourself.
Do you know anything about it?
I do know him.
Okay.
And do you find him credible?
Oh.
Sometimes.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll have a chat afterwards.
Yeah, I'd love to pick your brain afterwards because
Yeah.
I recognised him immediately as soon as he said
Oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
Oh, dear.
Okay.
That means we
It's
didn't do a
always
very
nice
good
to come
job.
to a session and be told that one of your sources is a bullshitter. Thanks for that, sir. Well done.
Okay, next question.
Unfair. We're all credible.
I'm
sometimes,
joking.
aren't
I'm
we?
joking. It's interesting. Anybody else for a question? Perhaps for Leo? There we go. Just here.
Question for Leo. I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit more about when you're working with a contributor and how maybe your script has to go out the window because you're being responsive and receptive to what they're saying, especially with the case of the Peace Deal film where you maybe had to change what your vision was for the film. And also when you're working with contributors who maybe don't have time because they've got busy, because they're celebrities, they've got busy diaries, you can't. And if you're going to change how your film is going to go because you're trying to respond to what material they're giving you or their vision?
Well,